absolutely incredible people here with us today. Garvita Gulhati is the founder of Why Waste, India's largest youth-led organization working on water conservation. Her Glass Half Full campaign has helped restaurants save over 6 million liters of water, and she recently launched a storybook collection encouraging children to be change makers and an app to help people calculate their water footprint. Garvita was recently the youngest person in the Forbes 30 under 30 Asia Pacific list of social entrepreneurs and also works extensively with Ashoka to mobilize other young people in schools across India to create change. Jerome Foster II is a 19-year-old climate justice activist, voting rights advocate, and emerging technology developer. He is the youngest member of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, has held weekly climate strikes in front of the White House for over 80 weeks in high school, and has spoken in front of the UN High Commission on Human Rights, amongst many other things. Jerome is the executive director of 1 Million of Us, an organization mobilizing the youth vote, and the co-editor-in-chief of The Climate Reporter, an international environmental news organization. We are incredibly privileged and excited to have both of you here with us today. Now, I don't know about our audience, but for me, listening to bios like this can be a bit intimidating because they don't really tell us much about who the person behind the bio is and how they became who they are. So I'd like to start somewhere personal with both of you. Jerome, you've mentioned in other interviews that you've had a wide range of influences on you, ranging from the Hunger Games to a nature-filled backyard in southeastern DC. Could you tell us about what your primary influences and experiences were as a child and how they've shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started as a kid, I really just had a really deep connection with nature because my family just allowed me to develop that as a young person. And I think that's really amazing for a young person to not just learn about climate change through the negative aspects of it, but to learn about it through their love of the natural world. And that was kind of where I started. And as I got older, I read more and watched more documentaries about the climate crisis. And I learned that there's a massive entire crisis is going on that's devastating entire people's entire communities. And I was like, me being in the United States, I have unique ability to make sure that we are setting the tone because America's polluting so much. And also we need to make sure that we're organizing in massive numbers to show that young people care about this issue. So through that, as a young person, I went through high school and middle school, just talking to my peers about it. And through that, I was just able to understand that this isn't something that just a few young people are worried about, but it was a generation-wide issue that through the climate strikes and through our organizing, we're able to show the scale of our concern and the scale of our action. And I think one of the tipping points from me to be a more traditional activist in the sense of organizing physically and doing massive marches that we from like climate strikes was that I was a climatology researcher and virtuality developer at National Geographic to Iceland. And basically there, I was allowed to voyage across different glaciers and see firsthand that the world around us is continuing to destabilize, and that if we want to see massive change, we're going to need systemic wide legislation and policy change that prioritizes people in the global south, people in different and people that women people of color, to make sure that we're going back to our roots and going back to the systems of nature that allowed us to live on this planet for so long in the first place.
That's so interesting because I think many of us view activists as people who've always been starting from this place of anger. And it seems like for you, it started from a real deep appreciation of the natural world and then translated into a necessity to act on that. Let's hone in on this idea of like tipping points that you brought up. Garvita, at just the age of 13, you were protesting firecracker usage in your community. Now, I know many Indian people dislike firecracker usage in our festivals, but not many follow through with action. Could you tell us more about this and what pushed you to act and how you knew what the right steps were as a 13-year-old?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, it's so exciting to be here. And thank you, Jerome and Manya, for kicking us off with such inspiring stories and moments. Um, I think, Manya, when I think back to when I was 13 and I chose to silently protest by staying back at home, I didn't know that it was the right thing to do. But at that moment, I knew that this was the best thing I could possibly do. As someone who did not have the capacity to go and get policies changed or to really have people make a difference, in the sense of absolutely changing their behavior. What I could do was change my behavior and hope to inspire them to do the same. And so for years, I would sit alone at home while my family would go out and probably burst crackers. But, I started seeing a change in them. 3 years later, one would stay with me. 4 years later, there was another one joining in. And just because they saw that I chose not to give up, they started coming back in. And so I think at that point, what motivated me or what made me realize that this would be the right step or the right thing to do was really knowing that if I do something, I can inspire that change. And of course, I didn't fully believe it myself. It was through practice that it came to life. But one thing that I've always learned through my through all of my years of growing up with everything around me, is my parents have always told me that if you want to get something to happen, you have to first do it yourself. You can't expect other people to do it if you're not going to be doing it. And so I think that instinctively stayed. But beyond anything, just the need and the realization that this is something that is not good for the environment came from the understanding of, again, my family and some people around me who would talk about the importance, and very similar to Jerome, a positive relationship with nature, loving it, spending time in it, time with it, appreciating it, having those peaceful moments, realizing just all of that nature's bounty has to offer, and also not just as the environment, but all of us as people together. And so I think appreciating those moments and translating it into self-belief, and building the idea of believe and make believe is what brought me there.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. I especially really appreciate the idea that it's not like you knew what the perfect thing to do was when you were that young and you were just starting out, but perhaps simply starting is an important thing, and that convinced other people to start along with you. I think just on this idea, one thing that really impresses me about both of your work is how you've convinced so many other people in power to believe you and to change their practices and take a risk on you. Like Garvita, you've convinced thousands of restaurants to save water, and Jerome, you've testified in front of legislators for more than 7 hours. What do you think goes behind being listened to by adults as a young person? And were there times that you weren't as confident as you are now and were still maybe succeeding or failing in convincing other people? Jerome, I'd love if you could start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the ways that young people, when we're talking about the climate crisis and things that are really pertinent to our generation, our future, a lot of it when we go and talk to them, it's just the simply us being there. Because as young people, we don't have an agenda. We aren't driven by money or power. We're driven by the hope for a future and the hope for a more sustainable world. And I think that's really is one of the driving ways that we are able to change legislators and world leaders' opinion, because they literally are unable to make the argument that we do not deserve clean air and clean water. They aren't able to form the discussion and say we're going to choose the extraction of oil and gas over the protection of our kids and future generations. So when we're there, they're facing the constituents that are going to be hit hardest and the worst. So for young people, what we do is we sound the alarm. We make sure that they know the state of the world, so they can't live in a fantasy about what needs to happen. They know that what they're doing is destructive to our planet. And what we do when we come and talk to them, we state the case of what's happening right now. We tell them about the scale, scope, and speed of this crisis. And also what we do is that we mobilize and we make sure that they're held accountable to young people, because when they're no longer able to hide in silos and hide in government buildings, they're seeing in the streets that no one is continuing to buy the lie and continuing to buy the complacency that they have. So as a young person and testifying in front of the DC Council for 7 hours and taking off of school, it was a risk that I took on saying that I'm skipping school for the next 2 days to make sure this bill is passed. And everyone around me, my parents, my teachers, all my classmates are like, what are you doing? Like, they're not going to listen to you. But when I stepped in those doors and every other person in the room was an adult that was in the 30s or 40s, and we're just there to talk about, a lot of them were corporate representatives, they were not even talking about the real issue. They were talking about profit and corporate economic growth and not talking about the basis of what climate legislation should be about. It should be about investing in our future, investing in infrastructure that protects us, and also making sure that we're safeguarding the environment for future generations. What I heard as a Native American proverb is that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. So we have to embody that in the legislation that they have to embody that in the legislation they propose and pass, and also making sure that as young people, we hold them accountable. So every time I go into elected representative's office or testify in front of Congress or a council, I make sure that they know that as young people, we're here fighting for our future. We're not fighting for corporate profits. We're fighting for the fact that we deserve clean air and clean water. And every single day, we're going to make sure that they know that this is an urgent issue that they're going to have to hear whether they want to or not.
I love the thing you said about how it's really, really hard to make the case that people don't deserve clean water. And once you force that in front of people, that forces them to engage a little bit. But I'm curious about, since you mentioned that that's not their starting point and that's not what they're necessarily looking to maximize, and maybe they're looking to maximize profits and corporate growth, how do you make them act against their incentives, especially if you're a young person trying to convince them of something? I'd love if you could start, and then Garvita, you could tell us about if that's an instance you've ever ran into with any restaurant person that you were trying to convince and any other people that you've engaged with, and if so, how you worked through that.
Absolutely. I think that when you talk to an elected representative or a world leader, they still are elected representatives. So they're elected to represent the people. And if you remind them of that moral clarity and the political courage they're supposed to have, then they tap out of the mindset of economics first, but society and culture first. Like, I think when you just bring morality to the conversation, they're able to tap into why they ran in the first place. And if they are good and moral at heart, then you're able to bring that out. I think that one of the key ways that as young people we make change is that, one, we create the public awareness. Like 4 years ago, climate change was an argument over whether it was real or not. And after the climate strikes, we mobilized over 7 million young people. Over 1 in 3 young people around the world heard about a climate strike digitally. And through that, elected representatives had to respond. We made a situation, we made an environment where climate change could not be continued to be ignored. And through that, we went and said, now that we've organized this movement, what are you going to do? And we throw the responsibility back on them, because as young people, we remind that as we grew up, we did not expect to be a part of this. Like, no one goes into a climate disaster saying we're going to send middle schoolers and high schoolers first. We're literally the last generation that is here saying this is the last moment possible. We have a decade before we start reaching tipping points. So when we go to elected representatives, we remind them that this is our space race. This is our moment where if we don't do something, this is quite literally the tipping point to climate disaster. So every time we go to them, we remind them of the urgency, we remind them of what action needs to be taken. And oftentimes they understand that we have to go back to our roots. We have to go back to natural cycles of what we're here to represent and what we're here to do as elected officials. So as long as you remind them of that, they always come back. But passing it on to Garvita, yeah.
Yeah, no, that was so powerful, Jerome. And I'd just love to pick up from the last point that you said, that we did not expect to be born into a world with, a climate crisis or to be growing into it. And that also makes us the most powerful and pivotal beings in resolving it, because we are growing up in a world of problems. And so it's in our nature to see those problems around us and think of solutions. Because as young people, we're curious. We want to know how we can make the world better, how we can make places around us better. And when we're growing up in a space that is so ever changing and so ever evolving and not changing for the best, to be honest, we want to make it better. And we're compelled to do that. And just like you said, we don't have any ulterior motive but to provide a positive future for ourselves and the generations to come. And so to be able to push that ideology, amongst officials, amongst associations, becomes very, very, tasking. I remember personally, I would have made hundreds hundreds of calls and written hundreds of emails, the National Restaurants Association of India, just trying to get them to change the way that they consume and think about water. And it took me about 6 meetings to convince them that there is no ulterior motive to this, to get them to listen to a young person who was trying to make a difference. Their first statement would have probably, or thought, and of so many restaurateurs that I visited even, was, why should we take advice from a teenager? What do you have to tell us that we don't already know? And so I think that's the first place where we need to see a powerful mindset shift in the generation above us, in realizing that we do have the power to make a difference because we have ideas like no others, because we are growing up in a world of change. And so we are compelled to think of those solutions. And when we talk about profitability, I completely agree with Jerome. And I just like to add to that the environment is the economy. Everything that we have today, everything that the economy is built out of, is because of the environment. And so just to take a moment to even appreciate it is something that people miss out on doing, and are so driven often by profits that we are completely delusional and even inobservant to what we are doing with the environment. And there are so many ways in which we can coexist with the planet. Environment and the economy and the environment can coexist if only we choose to see it in that manner. And that's something that is still lacking in a lot of ways. But I have so much faith in our generation and the mindset that we bring into the workspace, even where all of us are thinking with a lot of positivity. As young people entering the workforce or entering universities, we bring in these interesting perspectives and mindsets. And when we merge that with the generations above us, it's bringing a powerful movement, which Jerome has been also speaking about, and that's exciting to see.
I love that. And both of your answers were incredibly powerful to listen to. And something interesting that stood out to me is it seems like in different countries, the credence people are giving to young people's voices and how much they already consider them legitimate feels like it's different, in that it seems like in a lot of the developed world, people have begun to, unfortunately, but now just expect young people to be the people leading the fight against climate change, while it feels to me like in places like India, that's not as much the case. And it was interesting to see that, like, regardless of where you're starting from, if you're meeting them frequently enough, they're going to get to the same place, hopefully. I wanted to get to this idea of faith a little bit more, because it seems to me like climate change and voter apathy and water shortages are all just huge issues to address. Like the ocean was literally just on fire. And I'm curious about how you choose to not react with fear and helplessness and instead have been so directed towards action and faith. I personally find that hard to have, and I know that's something that you can develop over time, but I'm curious about if that was always your instinct, and if not, how you've perhaps moved from a place of helplessness to a place where you can see yourself as seriously impacting this issue. Garvita, I'd love if you could kick us off.
Yeah, sure. So I just like to start off by sharing this concept of climate anxiety, which a lot of young people are facing today. And it's something that's so real, because while you're working on one problem, you're being exposed to all of these other issues that are constantly existing, and you are overwhelmed by what even you want to start with and how much you can really do. And I was very often overwhelmed and just anxious about what can I personally do? How can I get more people involved? It was almost 2 years or 5-6 years of me working as or being officially, if I had to say, a climate activist. And I would still feel those moments of what can I do? And I happened to chance upon this book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling and Ola Rosling. It's by Gapminder, and that was powerful and pivotal in changing the way that I thought about change. And I think to me that book made me feel more positive about the future in a way that nothing else ever had. It made me realize that we're always looking to build and to constantly solve problems without even taking a step back and reflecting on everything great that we've already done. And I was sort of compelled to reflect on my journey, and I realized that if I was able to do so much, and if I'm able to just make every young person think in the same way, just think of the amount of change we could bring. And also the second thing was really realizing that I can't do this alone, and I need people with me to do this. And that's when, also a lot of my work with Ashoka of helping more young people realize their power to be change makers. And so I think these were two very pivotal things, like reflecting on what has already happened, the change not only you have been able to bring about, but when you see the world has progressed. I think using those moments is powerful moments of quiet reflection. And also, of course, realizing that you can't do this alone, and at the same time that you're not in this alone. We often tend to get lonely, and we feel like we are the only ones, taking the burden of the world, and it's very momentary, but it exists. And I think just to know in that moment that there's just so many other young people just like us who are in this with us, and not just young people, but now more people joining the movement and realizing that we're in this together. And if we choose to do it together, we can really help the world become a more powerful place, sort of building something like an everyone a world. So no matter what you do in life, you can impact, and sort of realizing that was very pivotal for me, because I realized that I don't need to ask everyone to become an activist. No matter what they are doing, they can make a difference. They just need to find it. And so I think that was a powerful mindset.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love Gapminder and Hans Rosling. And all of his, something really interesting he once pointed out is that the last 20 years have been the period of highest reduction in child mortality ever. And almost every person asked about it thinks it's like almost doubled in those 2 decades. And just on this topic of while we're still on helplessness, Jerome, you've been increasingly talking about the interconnectedness of different issues, something that you've been addressing through 1 Million of Us as well. And I was really interested in the idea that, especially as people begin to realize that climate change and racial inequality and all these problems around us are all deeply tied to each other, does that not make the problem feel bigger to you? And how, as and when you realize that the problems are so big and interconnected, do you know how to actually start without being overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that when we talk about intersectionality and we talk about how big the climate crisis is, we have to remember that since the climate crisis is the biggest crisis we ever faced as a human species, it's the greatest opportunity for us to come together and talk about what the solutions are. And I think that when we talk about intersectionality, when we make the problem not big, but just entailing of aspects of equity and aspects of environmentalism that we don't talk about, we're able to get at the root of the problem. We're able to get at the roots of oppression that have existed for the past hundreds of years. And I think if we go back to the idea that if we're just in tune with indigenous peoples, and if we're in tune with what the world is like, and not living in a world that says that a car that's new in 2019 is more valuable than the trees that give us life and the water that helps us survive, I think that's really what the climate crisis is all about, is getting away from that idea of exploitation and limitless growth without development. If we mimic nature truly, and our economy is not just an extra industry that doesn't even take into account any moral boundaries, but only focus on profit, I think we get away from the idea that nature is cyclical, and that everything else in the world has to abide by the idea that there's an input and there's an output. With the economy, they only think about the input. They don't think about where that output goes. And if we're able to say, we've grown, the world has enough water, the world has enough food, the water has enough resources for us to thrive. But right now, we're so focused on growth that we aren't stopping that growth and say, hey, we built. Now let's focus on development, equity, and joy. Let's make sure that we have that access everywhere. Let's make sure all of our roots are well nourished. Let's make sure all of our branches and leaves are growing equally and equitably. I think that's really what the age that the environmental movement is ushering in, is that we have to stop this idea that we can continue to lead the pack just by having very few people be very well off while the rest of the world is being dragged along. We have to make sure that everyone has the ability to live the life that they deserve. Everyone deserves the basic fundamentals of life. Everyone deserves dignity, and everyone deserves the ability to live a sustainable life, but we aren't giving them that ability to. So I think that's really one of the things that why we talk about intersectionality, is because the world is intersectional. The world is not a silo in which racial justice does not impact gender equality, because there are many Black and brown women, they're Indian women, they're Native American women, they're Asian women. There are so many people that are coming together at many different intersections. And if we don't tackle them at those intersections, we're leaving many communities behind. So I think if we want to see systemic and long-term change, we have to start where the problem originated. It's the idea of exploitation and hierarchy of races and sexes. And if we get to that root and say, let's make sure that women of color, Indigenous women are leading the conversation at the negotiation table, then the solutions will be rooted in justice and equity.
I just wanted to quickly add to that. It's so powerful. But when I sort of reflected on a lot of problems that we were facing last year, be it COVID crisis, the forest fires, water crisis, inequalities, it all seems to really stem from this one inherent notion that human beings, or we, are the most superior beings. And so that's where, maybe coming together of us comes, where each and every one of us needs to change that specific mindset and live more sustainably. And by sustainably, it's not just with the planet, but with every single person and being around us. And it was very, very powerful to hear that from Jerome as well.
Thank you both for sharing that. I think the thing that really stood out to me is that while a lot of people deflect questions of intersectionality by claiming that that makes the issue more complicated, you're absolutely right that it just makes our understanding of the issue more true. And the issue is complicated, and there's nothing we get out of pretending it isn't. While we're still on the topic of just how we broadly think about climate change, I wanted to talk about the different approaches both of you take, because they're very different and both very powerful. Garvita's approach seems to focus on more individual, small actions, building up to big impacts, like 6 million liters of water being saved by convincing restaurants to make small changes. And Jerome's approach involves pushing for large policy or corporate changes, like the Clean Energy DC Act. I'm curious about why both of you picked the very different approaches that you have and how you think those perspectives interact. Garvita, what do you think?
So I think it's interesting to see what the kind of change that we're bringing from these two very different perspectives. But I think it also goes a lot to the kind of problems that we're trying to solve at individual levels. And I think more than anything, there's such a powerful need for both of these to coexist. I think without solutions, without advocates, without activists, without individuals, without all of these, communities coming together to really make a difference, we can't make the change that we want to see. And we spoke about it earlier as well. But when we talk about, maybe being anxious about all the problems that exist, you need to clearly realize that you can't just make that change, all of that change yourself. And so you find the one thing that, you think you can impact the most to your best of abilities. And you go and you plunge yourself into that and realize that this is what I'm going to do. And this is the change I'm going to bring about. And know that there's someone else out there who is helping mobilize more people and bringing them into that change. And so I think one, realizing what are your strengths, playing to your strengths, because you don't need to go and learn 1,000 other things. We haven't gone out there and taken classes on how to be climate activists. We've just done what we know best and tried to channel that into activities and methods and solutions that we think we can challenge the status quo best at. So finding your strengths and playing into that with the community is, I think, what brings so powerfully together these different approaches, and also what probably sees both of us looking at the issue with two such very interestingly different perspectives.
Yeah, I love that idea about picking your problems. And thank you so much for all the work you do in training other people to pick their issues as well. And Jerome, I know you've pointed out in the past in front of the UN that many corporations and oil companies actually emphasize individual behavioral change sometimes to deflect from the massive damage that they cause. Could you maybe add on to Garvita's response and talk about how we can actually do both, how we can push for sustainable individual practices, which Garvita points out are completely necessary, while still holding our governments and corporations accountable?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we talk about what individual action looks like versus systemic action, it starts from the community. Like the community makes up the system is the community. And I think that when corporations do it, a lot of times they're trying to shift the blame. Like in the 1970s, what ExxonMobil did and so many plastic production companies did is that they said, you need to recycle. You need to make sure that you are recycling and giving it back to the community. When before that in the 1960s and prior, they had the responsibility themselves to make sure that they are recollecting those glass bottles and putting it back into the input cycle. But what they did is said, we don't want any of that responsibility anymore. We're going to give it on the consumer and make them feel guilty for a system they did not create. I give the analogy of, say you move into a new neighborhood and you have 5 homes on this row, and you go into the house, and every time you turn on the light in the living room, you're setting someone else's on fire that's two houses down. And every time you turn the water on in your bathroom, you're now flooding 2 homes the other direction. And when you think about how you live your life, now you have to live with all the lights off and with no water running. But that's not your fault. You did not set up the system that way. You're just trying to live your life. And when corporations say you need to limit your light production, you need to switch your light bulbs, we need to say, why are you sourcing it from a source that's burning our ancestors and burning nature that's around us? Why aren't you just building something that works? No one wanted a system that continues to kill us. No one wanted a system that floods people in Uganda and continues to burn forests in Brazil. We wanted a system that's equitable and fair. And I think that's really what the difference between system and local changes is, that up to a point, people don't want to have to live their lives in shelter of everything that they do. The system has to work properly. And right now it's completely broken and fixed into a way that doesn't even prioritize our daily life. And I think that when it talks about system change and talks about like corporations and the role of government is to represent the people. So in amalgamation, what we're doing is saying that this policy is supposed to protect us from the fact that we don't have to go out and turn our light bulbs off in the living room, turn the light bulbs off in the kitchen to save someone else's house from burning down. What we're asking for our government to do is say, hey, you need to make sure that these corporations aren't wiring our house this way. Make sure that they're fixing that. And so it's that tandem of making sure that elected officials know, and then the system in response fixing it and making sure that it works properly. So it's a mix of both, I guess.
Thank you both for sharing that. I love the analogy because it's both true that if we know we are every time we're switching the light on, we're burning a house, it doesn't hurt to reduce the lights we're switching on, especially like in all the cases Garvita stopped. We're doing it for no real reason. We're just filling the glasses full of water and then leaving them on the table. It doesn't hurt to not do that. But at the same time, it would also be ideal if the lights weren't connected to burning houses. And what's really interesting to me is with all the system change that you talk of, I can't see a lot of that occurring without the work Garvita does as well, because corporations or governments are unlikely to act in those ways unless they see their voter or consumer incentives changing in meaningful ways as well. I know both of you brought up community at multiple points in all your responses about how different people are doing different things and how you need those people to support you through that process. A lot of people tend to view activists as these lonely, anti-establishment, angry types. But both of you seem like really warm and wonderful people with communities of activists and friends holding you up. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you found your people and what role they've played in your journey? Garvita, what's it been like for you?
Yeah, I think in the beginning it was kind of lonely, but I'd love to share the story of a teacher that I had in school. She was actually a science teacher, but she taught this subject called environmental education, which is not compulsory by the Indian board. It's not a subject that you're supposed to teach. She was just hella passionate about teaching it, and she would teach it alone to all students from grade 6 to grade 12, and she would take a 45 minutes class every week for every single grade. And at that point, I don't know what importance we saw in what she was trying to tell us. She would make us visualize the earth, and she would say, draw the earth now, and 20, 30 years from now, and we would be drawing robots on one end and a beautiful green planet 10 years ago. And I don't think any of us really saw the significance of what that was doing to our mindsets at such a young age. But really, what she was doing was empathizing us towards the planet and anything that was to come. And I think the powerful roles that beings like these play in our lives is what transitions and helps us become the change makers that we are today. And when I think of my journey, I was put into the very typical Indian mindset of getting into doing well in your high school and then getting into a good college, and that very typical grind. And I would be told by so many of my teachers, my peers, that I was wasting my time. My nonprofit is called Why Waste, and everyone would say things like, "Why are you wasting your time with why waste?" And just telling me that this is not important at the moment. You can do this, once you're settled in life. But it was really beating that idea and seeing that the planet is not going to wait for me to graduate, settle down, get a job, get married, etc. before it starts to get better. If I have identified a problem today, and if I know I can make a difference, I have to do it now. And that belief really helped bring about more people in my community realize that change is possible. And when you change the mindset of that first person, they are going to empower you and help you to change the mindset of everyone around you, because they stand to be that testimony that you never thought you could have. And just chase that first person, because that is the hardest one. And then after that, everyone comes, because now you have the confidence to do it. And then I think the second thing is finding these powerful global communities that exist, like Global Change Makers, Ashoka, Global Citizen, that have really been created as a safe space for us to come and find people who think like us, and who really empower and push us to continue to be the change makers that we are. And so I think that's the powerful role that the community has played for me. I think realizing that there are people around the world who are thinking just like me, because I might not have direct peers who think the same way, but to know that there are people like Manya and Jerome who are out there, I feel more gracious, that and I know that there are people who think like me, and I'm doing the right thing.
I'm sure your environmental studies teacher is really proud of you now. Something that really stood out to me is that even if you didn't find like a pre-built community, it seems like a lot of your process was making that community for yourself by convincing people of the same things you believe in, and then just by extension having people who believe in the same things as you. Jerome, what was that process like for you, and what advice do you have for our audience?
Yeah, I think that it is this audience that's listening now. Like, a lot of my community has been the people that have been watching these documentaries. And when I was an audience member, it was just listening to people that were speaking. And I think it was, at first, it started as just like a lunch table conversation when global warming was like, everyone's talking about how it wasn't real, and like no one wanted to talk to you about climate change at all, and like it was so hard to get anyone to care about it. But I think at events like this, that were back when they were physical before COVID, it just allowed us to reconnect with each other and to build that community. I think that for a long time we kind of siloed our own selves within the environmental movement, where like there was some people that are fighting for animal rights, some people that are fighting for water, some people that are fighting for just like infrastructure investment and like seawalls, and some people that are only focusing on science and development of solar panels. I think that at talks like this, everyone came together and said, this is the community. This is our community. It's climate justice is the merger of technology and science and culture and society, and like all those things come together to fight for that one justice. And that's really the community that I really love to be a part of, is because like it's everyone comes together from so many different creative fields. Like good friend of mine that's in New York City, she's a filmmaker. She makes short film documentaries as a student. And another person that I know is a graphic designer. Another one's an artist that just makes really cool watercolor paintings. And another person is just a person who likes analytics and computer programming. And everyone comes with their own just like passion, and everyone come together and it just makes that movement so much stronger. So I think the community is just anyone who's passionate about the earth and willing to fight for it. And that's everyone who's here right now, like listening to us, taking the time out of your day to come listen to some kid talk about climate change. Like, we're the community. Like, reach out to us. Let's reach out to you. Let's continue to build this even further after this.
Yeah, I love the examples you give us, because I think it's common, especially for people like on the other end, to often like look at either of you and think, well, I'm not Garvita, I'm not Jerome, I'm not studying the things they're studying or living in the places they're living, so maybe I can't get their community. But I love that you mentioned that people aren't coming at it from the same place or the same skill set or even the same interests, just one thing that they care about. I'd love to transition to student questions now, because we have spoken a lot about things that both of you are great at. And one of our students, Angela Bushevska, had a question about coping with the things that are difficult. Angela?
Yeah, thank you so much, Maya, and thank you so much, Garvita and Jerome. So I have to say one thing about the community. For example, I have met Garvita through some wonderful organization that I have been included in. How having her as like a role model in what I have been doing was really powerful, and thank you so much, guys, for doing it. So I really want to ask, because I know how it feels when you're a climate activist, especially in place where you don't have so many people that look like you that are climate activists. It can be hard, and sometimes you don't get the impact that we expected in the first place. And I know that it's a little bit heartbreaking time. So it was for me at the first step when I was starting as a climate activist. So I really wanted to ask, how are you guys coping with that when you like don't see the results you expect and you put your whole best in a campaign or whatever it is? Thank you.
Jerome, you want to go first?
No, you got it. You can do it. Got you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think first off, thank you for being so kind, Angela. It's just so nice to see you and your bright face. But I think it's just positive moments like these that make you believe that even though you might fail the first few times, you can be successful because there is this community that is constantly supporting you and rooting for you. But more than anything, I think when you fail, you realize what went wrong, and you know that you can do this, and you learn how you can do it better. I think through all the various steps along the way, when I failed or my ideas didn't work, I only realized that it was because there was a much better, much more powerful, much more impactful idea that hadn't yet taken shape. And it was just time before I found that. And so not to be disheartened, but to really use that as an empowering moment, I think has been a powerful way for me. And of course, community, nothing beyond the people around me, smiling faces like all of yours, and everyone that even Jerome mentioned. Just so powerful to realize that you always have these people to go back to for advice or just understanding if you know you're stuck with yourself.
Yeah, I think that's Garvita like told it best. Like, I think that really it's just like leaning back on the community. Like, all of us are here just to support each other, and like even after this, let's continue to organize. And like the next climate strike is September 24th, so we got like even more work to do coming up. So it's just like really great to see you like here and like a part of this conversation. Like, we're gonna keep working and keep pushing forward as well. So yeah.
I love the idea that.
So sorry, Manya. I was just saying that thank you so much for your answer, and the community is the power that we have to work on. Thank you so much, and keep on shining.
Yeah, it's so meaningful to believe that if the solution didn't work, that means there's a better solution. There's another question that I'd love to get to by Joaquin.
Well, hi there. First of all, I want to thank you for your willingness to speak with us, but above all, for contributing to change the world. My question is, how could we, from our place, help young people like us discover the importance of voting and being politically aware? Because, well, in my country, like young people is not very interested in political aware. They are not interested in voting, and I think that's something that can change, because I think governments shape our life and shape the future. So that was my question.
Yeah, I think I can take this one. So I run an organization called 1MillionOfUs that focuses on youth voting internationally. I think this is really key, is that if you want a young person to be involved, just don't just talk about like voting itself, but talk about why they're voting and like why they're passionate about it. Especially in the United States, a lot of young people care about climate change and also about economic development and how that intersects. So what we talked about is that we want jobs. We want climate jobs for young people and training in colleges. Another thing we talked about is like climate education in schools. And I think if we just talk about the main issues that young people care about and why they're voting and what they're voting for, we get like a massive movement just around that. And especially in the United States, what happened is that we were able to get to a point where 2 in every 10 vote was from a young person voting for the first time in the 2020 election. And that transformed how America is now functioning, because now we have youth representation in a real way. And I think if you're just able to get young people together and say, we're just fighting for one justice, whether that's in Argentina, talking about the issues that are most important there, just organizing them around that and saying, we want this piece of legislation to be introduced, or we want this one goal. And organize around that, organize marches, organize rallies, and just get your friends to come and join and be passionate about it. And through that, they'll take it from the streets and take it to the polls.
Yeah, I don't know how to very much more powerfully contribute to that, because Jerome's seen this through and through. But just to add, I think I would say, make your friends and your peers realize that every single person's voice matters, and so does theirs, right? We're here and we're living together, and our voices matter, what we think matter, and what we want does matter. And this is the most powerful way to get that. And everything else.
I'd like to add, Joaquin, my organization does workshops for people to join. So if you're interested, you can go to our website and we can like send you some resources as well. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Awesome. Next, we have a question by Gina about nonprofits.
Hi, I'm Gina. So obviously both of you guys are doing such amazing work. I know Jerome, you're like speaking in front of like legislation and stuff, super inspiring, and Garvita with your why waste and water. So I just wanted to ask, personally, I'm interested in like climate change and I'm trying to start my own nonprofit. So as you guys are kind of in like a position, right, in your community, especially, how'd you grow your nonprofit and how'd you get people around you to like help with growing it and like getting people around you to care?
I could start. So I just talk about two quick stories of people around me. So when I entered university, I was deeply passionate about, the change that I was bringing about, and I made it loud and clear, and everyone around me had to know it. There was a recess that we had, and I had a friend approach me with logo designs for why waste, and I was stunned by what he had created, because he was someone I just met months ago, and he was just as passionate about a change that I was trying to bring about, and had gone to the extent of creating that really using his strengths to add value to the work that was already happening. And the second story is of another peer who I met at university, who actually is from Dubai. And when she went back during summer break, I got a call from her at the end of summer break saying, I've convinced all of the restaurants in my city to, take up your movement. Can you please send me posters? And I was beyond stunned because I realized that she was someone who had gone and done something that I couldn't have done, that's for sure, and had taken my idea and translated it into something so powerful in a world that I didn't know of. And so I think two big learnings from that was one, solutions that you build and the change that you're try to bring about through your organization should be localized solutions built from a global perspective. Something that people can adopt anywhere, but is really crafted to what you need most for your society. And those are empowering organizations and empowering solutions that have a lasting impact. And second is find people who are just as passionate as you. And you find those people only when you, through and through, are able to engage and just blaze your passion out there. And you will find people very easily when they just know how much this means to you. Believe and make believe, something that I'd mentioned earlier, is I think the most powerful way to get that passion out there.
I definitely want to add on to that by just asking, like, what is your organization, like, what inspired you to start your own nonprofit organization?
Yeah, so basically, in my school, I wanted to like kind of like bring some environmental activism in a sense, because obviously growing up, I've always cared about it, and I've always even like insisted my family to like do like little things to like help the environment. And so when I saw like in my community and in my school there wasn't much going on, I kind of like took it upon myself to like create something. And so I thought that like maybe I could help, I don't know, change people around me, especially like my friends and their families and that stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that if you're doing an organization like that, that's what one of the main ways you grow is just like talking to your community even more. I think one of the biggest ways that my organization grew is that I did like local town halls in my community, like going to a local library or going to just a local just public area where a lot of people are, and just posting on social media saying, hey, we're doing this an open meeting where anyone who isn't a part of the organization can just come and learn. And from there, they can volunteer, they can volunteer some of their time and be a part of their school. I think that one way that we get a lot of young people to be a part of organizations as well is to offer them volunteer hours. Like if you talk to their school and say, hey, I run a nonprofit organization and we're doing like some plastic pickups or doing some community conversations about climate justice, then most often than not, they'll give you like ability to like allow people to like fill out slips that are volunteering with your organization, and you'll get even more people wanting to join because everyone needs community service hours. I think another way to grow is that just doing live streams like this, like what Global Citizen Year is doing, just on social media. One of the ways is just like going on live with like one of the other people that work at the organization and talking about like why you started it and saying like, we're doing a big event in about a month and a half from now. And oh, sorry about that. But if we're doing a big event like a month and a half from now, and we want more people to join and volunteer, and like just reach out and like see people like that, like maybe not even just let them reach out, but reach out to some people by yourself. Like scroll through Instagram and you may see someone gardening in your community, or just searching by location and saying, hey, do you want to join this organization? We're doing such and such 2 weeks from now. We really need some people. And like, I think just really being positive and just trying to give as many just avenues for involvement is great. And people will definitely join. Like your spirit is so just awesome and just like just energizing that I know people would just like really want to join your organization anyway. So probably in a year from now, you have like hundreds of thousands of people working with you, and we'll be here listening to you. But yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all your advice and all your help. I'm sure you guys are busy, but thank you for taking the time to like come out and speak to us. So yeah, I appreciate you guys.
exactly what Gina said. And I know we're running out of time. So I just wanted to close on the question that if you have any short, small pieces of advice that you would have liked to have when you were starting, what would those be? And for everyone here, please go to the Slido link so that you can take the closing poll. Oops, sorry. Garvita and Jerome, please.
Sure. I think that let's see. One piece of advice that I always give, because especially the environmental movement is kind of matured now. It's been around for about 3 or 4 years. And I think that one of the ways that we continue to build momentum and not get like burned out or really like just really sad about the fact that we haven't made as much progress as we wanted to is to celebrate the victories, like celebrate some of the small things that have happened and just say like, that's because of us. We did that. Like young people came together and we did that. And that continues to motivate us to continue going, because like even over this past like month, we've seen like the entire Exxon Mobil continuing to pollute, and we're seeing like the oceans on fire due to in the Gulf of Mexico, and now we're seeing another fire happening in the EU. That can be really devastating for us, like knowing that we're volunteering so many hours and not seeing massive change. But we know that like we were the cause of COP26 being so progressive, because we literally have Greta there because we organized. Like people are listening to us because we made them listen. And now we're at the seat at the table. Even though we're there in the private meetings, we're in the public court. Like they can't just ignore us anymore. So I think celebrating that and continuing to just be with other activists, and maybe taking 30 minutes out of a meeting to just come together and not even talk about climate, just watch a movie or just be kids, because at the end of the day, we are still like young people and we want to like celebrate that. So definitely have some balance and continue organizing as well. But yeah.
Yeah, that was powerfully framed. I lost my trail of thought. Yeah, absolutely. I think just knowing that sometimes you can take some time off and enjoy and celebrate the change that you've done is powerful. And the other thing that I would sort of add on to is don't get disheartened. There's a lot of times and a lot of things that might not work out, but that doesn't mean that you didn't give it your best. And sort of just remember that you're always trying, and you and your community, your people, your friends, and everyone around you, you're all just doing your best. And so just believe in that power of one, and know that if we couldn't do it the first time, we will do it the second, third, the fourth, but we will eventually do it. So constantly have that belief in we and not completely just losing hope, continuing to work hard even when there is no hope, and just enjoying the process. I think that's something that we forget, while we're on the streets, or while we're trying to convince people to change the way they think. We need to enjoy that moment too, that we're in this together, and just look at what we've created. It's so powerful. Let's just let that sink in for a minute.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your time and your work and your energy. What you've created is absolutely extremely powerful, and I'm really grateful you spent this hour with us today. For everyone in the audience, the Slido link is in the chat, and we would love to hear your feedback. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much to everyone who joined, and thank you, Manya, for being such a wonderful moderator. Thank you to Global Citizen here and all the partners. And thank you, Jerome. It was so lovely to have this conversation with you.
Likewise. Thank you for everyone who's taking the time to be here. We're going to keep on organizing. We're going to keep on pushing.
Yes.
We're Generation Y call to action. Like, this is us. This is our movement. So keep on fighting the good fight.
Yep, absolutely.